Thank you all for being here. I am so excited. I was actually just talking to some of the HEDNA team last night and this morning. We have been working on this partnership and session for quite some time now, and I was actually just connecting with someone in the bathroom about how reinvigorating this is to be with each other in person. I know it's been a rough few years for all of you, so really excited to be here, be a part of this, be a part of these conversations, and have a little bit of a different conversation. I am Hannah DeMaio, Vice President of Brand Strategy for Women Leading Travel and Hospitality. We are a membership-based association for executive-level women in the travel and hospitality industry. We have a mission to unite, inspire, and empower our leaders, and we do that through in-person events, virtual events, peer groups, newsletters, research, and so much more. Part of what we do, though, is we want to make this inclusive to everyone, and so that's why we have different things like our virtual events that are accessible to everyone. We do partnered events like this as well. Even though our membership is just for women, we do have other things that, men and women can be a part of. So today's conversation, I'm super excited to introduce Nisreene Atassi. She is, I always have to look at your title, I'm sorry, Senior Director, Global Head of Social Media and Influencer Engagement at Expedia. And she's also a Women Leading Travel and Hospitality Advisory Board member. We also have Robin Harnish, Chief Operating Officer of Holibob. Robin, do you want to give a little bit more about your incredible background?
Yeah, sure, thank you. I am a travel industry lifer, and I am the COO of Holibob, and we are a B2B company that's just focused on selling experiences. Our mission is to enable any company to sell experiences, so hotel companies like many of you, we enable companies like you to really sell experiences to your travelers.
And Nisreene?
Yeah, I've been with Expedia Group for almost 6 years now. And prior to that, I was actually working on the agency side doing communications, and I was focused on Dubai tourism for about 2 years. So I was living in the Middle East, which was an amazing experience, and came straight from Dubai to Seattle for my role with Expedia Group, which has been exciting.
Amazing. So in this session, we'll just be diving into our ethical workplaces, and that's taking into account our impact economically, socially, environmentally, and with respect to human rights. This conversation is, a different perspective from the two of you, so let's just dive right in. Can you guys start by sharing a time you made a career decision based on your own ethical values? Robin?
Yeah, for me, my company, Tourism Solved, was actually acquired by Holibob in April of last year. And I remember when I sat down to meet the two co-founders of Holibob, one of the first things that we really talked about after kind of knowing that we really matched in a lot of ways in terms of our mission and some of the things that we were working on was really when we talked about our values. And one of the main values of Holibob one of them is authenticity. And it's really about being vulnerable and allowing everyone to have a voice. And that really struck me and was really important to me in a company. We're a very small startup. And we're now a mix of myself and my team. We were a team of 9 people, very established in the industry, in the experiences industry, combining with a very young group of entrepreneurs. And coming together, we wanted to really make sure that we had a group of people coming together that always felt comfortable expressing their own ideas. Because we really feel like the way that we're going to succeed is if everybody's ideas are considered the same. Just because I have 20 plus years of experience in this industry doesn't mean that my idea is what's going to get us to where we want to be in this, in our company. It could be looking at things a different way. So we really value making sure that everybody feels heard, everybody feels comfortable expressing their opinions all the way across the organization. So it was really one of the first things that really made me feel comfortable feeling like this was the right decision for me in having my company acquired. And it truly has been a great decision. And I tell a lot of we're on a hiring spree. I tell a lot of our new hires that, this is one of the first companies that I can rattle off all of our values, and we actually live them, and we really do value them. So, yeah, I think that's a great example.
That's awesome. And Nisreene?
So for me, because I've been in the marketing and communication space for nearly 20 years, having to deal with sort of crises and ethical decisions is something that's come up, pretty frequently in my career. But specifically, since I've been at Expedia Group, there was one instance where there was clearly an ethical issue sort of going on with one of the partners that we sold on our site. And it started to bubble up. It was clear from the social media perspective, we started to see some of our travelers and the general public voice their concerns with us being affiliated with this partner. And one of the core things when you work in marketing is you really have to make sure that you separate your own personal beliefs from sort of any sort of decision making, or otherwise everything becomes incredibly subjective. And in a world where it's oftentimes a gray area, you want to make sure that you're really doing sort of what's right for your company and what's right for the customer. And in this instance, once we looked at it, it became super, super clear that this was not a gray area, and there was very clearly a right and a wrong, right? And we have to make sure that as a company that we are going to be on sort of the right side of history. And this particular vendor sold activities in the sort of animal space. And so for those of you in the tourism sector who deal with animal activities, you'll know that this is always a hot button topic, and there are several organizations out there who go and sort of certify certain activities as being sort of authorized and some being not. And so as a global company, we've always tried really hard to make sure that we were only selling activities for animal sort of excursions, if you will, that were certified. There was one particular company who was sort of bordering on the gray area, and it became really, really clear that some of their practices were no longer ethical. And even though it seemed like it was straddling the gray area based on the sort of standards that some of these other organizations had set, it really made us sort of look internally and say, okay, well, as a company, what are the core values that we stand by? And it was still, people were sort of like, if we don't go by the guidelines, then we're letting personal decisions sort of impact. But I had to really push and say, at time, it does require sort of a human interaction to come in and say what is right and what is wrong. And as sort of good agents in society, it's really on us to sometimes be the decision makers in that. And so I worked with a couple of my team members and some other stakeholders, and we built this business case, to really sort of showcase how sometimes the value that a company stands for and standing firm on that ground is more of an ROI than the transaction or whatever revenue you would get from selling that activity. So we had to go, and I presented the case to our CEO, and that activity is no longer sold on our site. So I felt really proud of that work.
Yeah, amazing. And both of you are clearly very intentional about making sure that all of your teams and all of the work that you guys are doing is sustainable and ethical and diverse. That was a perfect example of how you worked internally to make sure all of your teams are doing that as well. Do you guys have any other examples of how, one of the big things that we like to do in these conversations is for the audience to have actionable steps to take with them back to their teams? Is there ways to make sure that the internal teams are also practicing those things as well?
I think for me, I always try to make sure I have a really diverse audience of the team that I'm working with, because I fully recognize that we all have unconscious biases. And so sometimes you need people who come from different, and it's not just different backgrounds, sort of ethnically, it's also different backgrounds in terms of their working history and where they've worked and what they've been exposed to, because people bring in different learnings because they've had different sort of trajectories in life. So for me, one of the major things I always stand by is, do we have a really diverse set of thinkers in this room for this decision that we're about to make? And if not, let's make sure we bring in people from different perspectives so that we don't approach this with any sort of blinders on, and that we can see all different aspects of the situation.
Yeah, and I think for us, we're in a unique position. We're a completely remote business. We're still a small startup. We've just raised our Series A last year. We're 46 employees, but we are from 14 different countries. So just by nature of that, we're really able to pull from, a diverse set of candidates. We're not held by, who are the candidates that we found here in the Seattle area. So I feel really fortunate that really allows us to open up our candidate pool and thus really the team that we're bringing together. So it really does kind of strengthen the groups and the teams that are talking about the issues.
And that's a perfect segue to my next question. Holibob I saw, had their Series A round funding this summer. Congratulations on that. But that also means that you'll probably be expanding your teams and growing. What will that look like, and how will you make sure that you are onboarding a diverse new set of team members?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I said, being able to pull from anywhere is just a dream in terms of looking for candidates. It does have its challenges in terms of looking at salaries and making sure that that's all really, really fair and equitable. I previously worked at TripAdvisor before starting my company, and I now have such a great, I'm so thankful for all the things that we had back there that were so expensive to get, all of the salary benchmarking tools and things like that. So just finding some of those things that are affordable to a startup like us, like we finally found something that is going to work for us to really benchmark globally, because it is really tough to make sure that that's really equitable across all of the different countries that we're trying to hire in, because it is really important to us. I've lived through acquisitions where we've acquired companies and over time tried to bring salaries where they need to be. And I've always recognized that, like, when you give somebody a raise because they weren't being paid where they were supposed to be, they don't think that that's a great thing. They're kind of still annoyed that, like, well, all this time you weren't paying me what I was supposed to be. So it's really important to me that we get this right from the beginning. But we also really want to make sure that we're focused on diverse candidates and things like that. And there's a few job boards like Pink and Squad Jobs are a couple that we post on. We also really, and those are, if you haven't heard of them, are really focused on LGBTQ plus, or just specifically diverse candidates. We also really make sure that some of our wording in our jobs are very clear. Like, if you don't meet all of these qualifications, we want a diverse candidate pool, apply anyway. Like, we're happy to to talk to you and understand what your qualifications are. So even just some of the wording in there, we work on and try to make sure that that's inclusive as well. So we're still finding our way and working through that, but those are some of the things that we certainly do.
I love that. And what about you guys?
Yeah, I would say it's really pretty similar. I think, as I mentioned before, having that sort of diverse group in the room also, I think, really stands true for when you're looking at candidates, right? So making sure that the hiring panel and the interview loop is also a diverse group of people who can bring different perspectives, because oftentimes, especially in the communication space, it's a heavily female-dominated sort of industry. And so when I'm hiring for my team, I purposefully go out and make sure that I have maybe somebody from the LGBTQ community on my hiring panel, but then also a male as well, because again, those different perspectives mean a lot. They see different things, they ask different questions, the conversation takes different trajectories. So getting all of that varied input, I do think is really, really helpful. Similar to what Robin was saying, especially when we are developing the job descriptions, we actually have a tool that we use called Textio, which allows us to sort of see if there are certain words that might skew one way or the other. So for example, they might say, this type of language doesn't resonate with younger demographic, or this type of language has a tendency to alienate those who are a little bit, sort of older and things like that. So it's super, super helpful in making sure that the job descriptions are very much evenly written and don't skew necessarily one way or another. The other thing that I personally do is I really leverage my network and the sort of connections that I have to make sure that anytime we are hiring, if I feel like it's relevant to a certain group or different kinds of stakeholders, I make sure that I sort of distribute that. So right around the time of George Floyd's death, I became aware of a group called the Black Travel Alliance. And so I started really working with them to just sort of better understand their mission. And I realized that they were an incredibly amazing pool of people who worked in the travel marketing space, whether it was influencers or content creators or marketers. And so now whenever we have a job opening in marketing at Expedia Group, I reach out to them. They have a regular newsletter. I send them our JDs. Sometimes they feature them on their social media pages. So I try to do what I can to make sure that when we are advertising for jobs, that it's going out to as much of a diverse sort of pool as possible.
Those are great tools and resources. Thank you for sharing even the names of them. So with Women Leading Travel and Hospitality, as a member and board member, Nisreene did a really great spotlight video for us to share more about her leadership and everything that, her values and what means so much to her. One of the things you did share was that you love to lead through empathy. Can you share a little bit more on that, and then also share a little bit more on, making sure that you uplift underrepresented voices on your teams as well?
Yeah, so I think, a big part of that for me is just that's who I am as a person. And I think as you become a leader, you have to really recognize what are the qualities that you embody as a human being that you feel like can really help lead your team, and what are the ones that maybe may not necessarily be as helpful. And so I find that because I'm an empathetic person, I'm able to have stronger interpersonal relationships with people, whether it's in my personal life or even my colleagues at work, because sometimes you get a different perspective from somebody who might be going through something. And I think we've probably all experienced this a little bit, especially during COVID. It was quite difficult for a lot of people to all of a sudden be at home, or perhaps they were caring for loved ones, or perhaps they lost somebody who was ill. And I find that you get a better understanding of what someone's going through when you just try to get to know them a little bit better and try to put yourself in their shoes. And additionally, I think with that, it helps to frankly just build trust. And trust is something that as a leader, if you don't have trust with your team, you most likely will not succeed. I think there are varying degrees of that, but trust is one of the most imperative things that you want to be able to have. And one of the greatest ways to build trust is by leading with empathy and showing when you are vulnerable, so that your team knows that you as a leader are not perfect, but using those opportunities as a time to learn and grow. So then they feel like they're in a little bit more of a safe place to really test things out, or they have the freedom to fail if it means that they're going to learn something when they get out of it.
Awesome. And what about you?
Yeah, I think that's great. For us, like when I think about the team that we have, and we do have a lot of younger team members, one of the things that we're talking about doing is making sure that we're having conversations about leadership training with everybody, rather than waiting for them to identify that that's something that they want to do. So having that conversation with everybody. And then the other thing that we're just starting to kind of put this together, we're very much a data-focused organization, looking at data to tell us, what the next moves are, what's working, what isn't. And we really feel like it's really important to make sure that as we're thinking about the information that we're sharing, we want to make sure that everybody in the company, regardless of what their role is is on the same page in terms of what this data is telling us. So for us, that can be very detailed, like Google Analytics data about what's happening on websites and things like that. And we're working to make sure that everybody understands what this data means to us and what it's telling us, so that when we are having conversations, we're all on the same level and we're all able to share information and share ideas that way. So we're really working on a plan to make sure that we bring everybody along in kind of that data sharing, and that if we think about like a digital transformation of our company, making sure that nobody gets left behind regardless of what their role is, so that when I think about our monthly company updates or our lunch and learns or ask me anything sessions, nobody's just tuned out, because as we start talking about these things and our numbers and our growth figures are obviously so important to a company like ours. If we're going to meet these numbers, that's what's going to unlock the next Series B of our investment. Like, it's really important to us, but if I'm not helping them understand what gets us there and how we get to these numbers, they're not going to be on the same page and they're not going to be as engaged. So we're really, I can't say I have all the answers to exactly how we're going to do all of that yet, but that's really one of the things that we're focusing on, is making sure that everybody is at the table with the same level of understanding.
So you both very clearly walk the talk, but why is it so important for a brand and an overall company to also do the same, for the health of the company, prioritize reinforcing ethical values through all of these practices?
I mean, I'll just say it, the generations sort of coming up, cancel culture is real, and they will not stand for any sort of I guess injustices, if you will, or unethical behavior. They have really understood the power of consumerism and the value of their dollar. And they fully understand that if they sort of over-index on one brand or another, it does make a difference. And so they are much more in tune with their core values as individuals. Even at a young age these days, I think when you look at high schoolers, you're seeing a lot of them are really starting to spearhead major movements within their local communities and things like that. And those are the future consumers. And in some instances, depending on your brand, they are a target consumer today. So if you, as an organization, think that you can sort of go and lead blindly without having to focus or acknowledge core values and good ethical behavior, then you're inevitably just going to be going down a wrong path, where the future sort of leaders and the future employees of a lot of the major organizations, they're just not going to stand for it. And now with the power of social media, they have a very easy platform to share their opinions. And so not only is it going to be harmful as a brand from a reputation perspective, but it's inevitably going to hurt your company from a hiring perspective as well. And it's going to become very clear to a lot of the top talent out there that your organization may not necessarily have the best ethical practices. And they will have choices. So it's something that I think every brand needs to be mindful of, regardless of who your audiences are.
Yeah, and I think you can't just put words on it and put a stamp on it and call it good for your website. You've really got to talk the talk and walk the walk. I think that's one of the things, building a startup and a company, having worked at big organizations in the past, it's really important to me to be focused on getting it right from the beginning, and not, I recognize it's really hard to make that shift when it hasn't been in place. Can be done, but getting it right from the beginning, I think is something really to pay attention to, and getting it right and keeping it going. And
I would just add to that you do not have to be perfect, because there is no such thing as perfect, because the world evolves, new issues come to light. So I think a lot of times brands feel very hesitant about making any progress in this space, because they don't feel like they have it fully nailed perfectly, and they want to wait till everything's sort of in place. But there is something to be said for crawling before you walk, and really taking those baby steps and progress doesn't always have to mean these big massive sort of like leaps. It can be small changes that happen over time, and it does show, I think, to your audiences. They can start to see when you're making change and when you're making progress. I think, you know, M&M's, the announcement yesterday about getting rid of the candy icons is a perfect example. They came out, they acknowledged that they've been working really hard to make progress in this space, but they haven't nailed it. But they were transparent about it. And so instead of sort of getting a ton of backlash for it, people were on board and they feel like they're going on this journey with them. I mean, it helps that M&M's is like a beloved candy around the world and they're absolutely delicious. But, you know, it's a really great example of their transparency. And I think it just goes to show the progress that I think a lot of companies are making.
Amazing. So I have couple minutes left with you amazing leaders. So do you have mentors that make you guys stay accountable for your core values and stick to them and kind of keep you on track as well?
I do, and it's somebody, I don't actually think he knows that he's my mentor, to be honest, because I haven't actually said that, but it's a colleague at Expedia Group who I actually recently just met, but I recognize that he led his team with a lot of the same ethical values that I try to really embody myself, and the way he works and sort of, you know, operates in certain meetings and things like that. So oftentimes when I feel like I'm struggling with a situation where I want to make sure I put my best foot forward for myself, but also want to make sure I'm doing it in the really ethical way, I sometimes come to him and we almost just like workshop some of the issues together, and I get his perspective, which I find to be really valuable.
Yeah, I definitely have a core group of coworkers and friends that I know that I can go to bounce things off of, and no question is silly or like out of the realm of me being able to ask. So I definitely have those people that I can run things by and feel like it's a safe space to ask anything.
Yeah, it's great to have a person to kind of just check in with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I have 30 seconds left on my timer. Does anyone have any questions? I'm sure we can answer one. All right. Well, if no questions, thank you so much for having us. Thank you both for being here. This has been fantastic, and we appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.